Scary telling.
I stared at my father in shock, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. My mother, flayed alive? Was this some sick joke? But the look on my father's face told me that this was no joke. Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to process what was happening. My mother, who had always been so kind and loving, was dead. And my father, the man who was supposed to protect us, had done it. I stumbled back, trying to escape from the horror that was unfolding before me. But my father grabbed me by the arm, his grip tight and unrelenting. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed, his eyes blazing with a manic intensity. I struggled to break free, but his grip only tightened. And then, suddenly, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a strange room, surrounded by darkness. The only light came from a single flickering candle, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I sat up, my head spinning. I had no idea where I was or how I had gotten here. But I knew one thing for sure: I needed to get out. I stood up, my legs wobbling beneath me, and stumbled towards the door. But it was locked tight, the handle refusing to budge. Panic set in as I realized that I was trapped. And then, I heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from somewhere outside. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. What was making that sound? Was it my father, coming to finish me off? The scratching grew louder, more insistent. And then, suddenly, the door burst open, revealing a figure in the shadows. It was my father, his face twisted into a grotesque smile. "Did you like the coat?" he asked, holding up a blood-stained garment. I screamed, trying to back away, but he advanced towards me, his eyes gleaming with madness. "You're just like your mother," he snarled. "Weak, pathetic. But don't worry. You'll be joining her soon enough." And then, he lunged at me, the knife glinting in the candlelight. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest, my legs pumping with adrenaline. But my father was fast, and he was gaining on me. I could hear his breath hot on my neck, feel his hands grabbing at my hair. And then, suddenly, I tripped, my head slamming into the hard floor. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was back in my bedroom. The sun was shining through the window, and everything seemed normal. But as I looked around, I realized that something was off. My mother's coat, the one my father had given me, was draped over the back of my chair. And it was still stained with blood. I tried to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the horror that had consumed my life. But I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in my own mind. And then, suddenly, I heard the scratching again, coming from somewhere outside. I knew then that my father was still out there, still watching, still waiting for his next victim. And I knew that I would never be safe again. The coat had claimed its latest victim, and there would be many more to come. Three cheers for Santa Claus and all the good children who believe. It's a phrase I've heard countless times throughout my life. But now, as I stare at the lifeless body of a little girl, it takes on a whole new meaning. I'm a detective, and I've seen some horrific things in my line of work. But this is something else entirely. The killer left no trace, no clues, nothing to help us identify him. All we have is a chilling message scrawled in blood on the wall: 3 cheers for Santa Claus and all the good children who believe. It's been months since that night, but the case still haunts me. We've had no leads, no suspects, no nothing. Until now. I received a tip from an anonymous source about a man who matches the killer's description. He's been seen around town, lurking in dark corners, watching children play. The source claims that the man believes he's Santa Claus and that he's on a mission to punish the naughty children. I'm skeptical, of course. But something about the tip rings true. So I decide to investigate. I find the man sitting in a park, dressed in a red suit with a bushy white beard. He's surrounded by a group of children, all laughing and playing with him. It's a disturbing sight, given what I know about him. I approach him cautiously, trying to gauge his reaction. He looks up at me, and his eyes widen in recognition. "Ah, officer," he says in a jolly voice. "What brings you here?" I try to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk, Mr. Claus." He nods, his expression turning serious. "Of course. Let's go somewhere private." We walk to a nearby alley, and I pull out a photo of the little girl who was murdered. I show it to him, and his eyes fill with tears. "Oh, my dear child," he says, shaking his head. "What a terrible thing to happen." I watch him closely, trying to read his body language. But he seems genuinely upset. "Do you know anything about her death?" I ask. He shakes his head again. "No, I'm afraid I don't. But I do know that whoever did this is a monster. No true believer in Santa Claus would ever do such a thing." I nod, unsure what to make of his words. But as we part ways, I can't shake the feeling that there's more to this man than meets the eye. Days turn into weeks, and the case grows cold once again. But then, out of the blue, I receive a call from the man himself. "Officer, I need to see you," he says urgently. It's about the case. I meet him at a secluded location, and he hands me a notebook filled with strange symbols and drawings. "I found this in my mailbox this morning," he says, his voice trembling. "I think it's a message from the killer." I take the notebook back to the station, and my team and I spend hours trying to decipher it. And finally, we crack the code. It's a list of names. The names of all the children who believe in Santa Claus. And next to each name is a check mark. My heart sinks. We have to act fast. We rush to each child's house, knocking on doors, searching for any signs of danger. And at every single house, we find the same thing, a gift wrapped in red and green paper with a note attached that reads, "From Santa Claus." It's a trap. The killer is using the children's trust in Santa Claus to lure them in. We track down the man who gave us the notebook, but he's nowhere to be found. It's as if he vanished into thin air. The next night, we receive a call reporting a break-in at a local toy store. We rush to the scene, and what we find is the stuff of nightmares. The store is decorated like Santa's workshop, with toys and decorations everywhere. But there's something off about it. The toys are twisted and macabre, with sharp edges and pointed teeth. The decorations are made of bones and sinew. And in the middle of it all, we find the man we've been chasing. He's dressed in a bloodied Santa Claus suit, surrounded by the mutilated bodies of children. He turns to us, his eyes wild with madness. "Ho ho ho," he cackles. "Merry Christmas." We apprehend him, but it's too late for the children. They're gone, lost to the madness of the jolly killer. As I leave the store, I can't help but wonder how many more monsters are out there, hiding behind the guise of holiday cheer. And I shudder at the thought of what horrors they may unleash upon the world. I woke up with a start, gasping for air. It took me a moment to realize where I was. I was in a coffin. My hands were bound, and I couldn't move. Panic set in as I realized what was happening. I had been buried alive. I screamed, but my voice was muffled by the dirt and wood surrounding me. I tried to push against the coffin, but it was no use. I was trapped. As I struggled to catch my breath, I felt something hard in my pocket. I reached in and pulled out my phone. That's why I saw it. There was a photo of me sleeping on beautiful red silk. But I had never taken that photo. I didn't even own red silk. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it. Was someone taking pictures of me while I slept? Had I been drugged and kidnapped? And most importantly, how did the phone end up in the coffin with me? As the reality of the situation sunk in, I felt a surge of fear wash over me. Who would do something like this? And why? Was it a sick joke? Or was there something more sinister at play? I tried to remember the last thing I did before waking up in the coffin. I had been out with friends, but I couldn't recall anything after that. Had someone slipped something into my drink? I tried to stay calm and focused. I knew that panicking would only make things worse. But as time passed, I began to feel a sense of hopelessness. The air was getting thin, and I was running out of time. As I lay there, waiting for my inevitable demise, I heard something. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. Someone was digging me up. The sound of shovels and dirt being moved filled my ears. At first, I was relieved. But as the coffin lid was lifted, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was the person who had taken the photo of me sleeping on red silk. They were wearing a mask, but I could see the malice in their eyes. They pulled me out of the coffin and dragged me to a nearby van. I tried to fight back, but I was too weak. As they threw me into the back of the van, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. There were other coffins in the back, each with a phone inside. I knew then that I wasn't the only one. There were others like me, trapped in a nightmare that was all too real. I didn't know what the endgame was, but I knew that I had to escape. I bided my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It came when the van slowed down for a sharp turn. I kicked open the back door and ran as fast as I could into the night. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, until I was miles away from that place. And even though I knew I had escaped, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me. That whoever had done this to me was still out there, waiting to strike again. I never did find out who was behind it all. But every time I see a red silk blanket or a phone with a photo of a sleeping person, I can't help but shudder. The memory of that coffin and the terror that came with it will haunt me for the rest of my days. I can still remember the terror that crept over me when I walked into that room. My 8-year-old daughter, Abigail, was hunched over her baby brother, his screams piercing the air. "Hey Daddy, I'm fixing little brother for you," she said, not even looking up from her gruesome task. I froze in horror as I watched her scoop the eyes out of her now blind brother. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. How could my sweet, innocent daughter be doing something so horrifying? As I stood there, rooted to the spot, Abigail finally turned to me with a huge smile on her face. "See, Daddy? He's all better now," she exclaimed, holding up the bloody mess that used to be her brother's eyes. I was so overwhelmed with shock and disgust that I couldn't even speak. I quickly scooped up my screaming son and rushed him to the hospital. The doctors managed to save him, but he was left permanently blind. After that incident, I started to notice strange things happening around the house. Things would go missing, doors would open and close by themselves, and I would hear voices whispering in the darkness. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but then Abigail started acting strangely too. She would talk to herself for hours on end and started becoming increasingly violent. One day, I caught her trying to drown her baby brother in the bathtub. I was terrified and didn't know what to do. I started doing research on the house and found out that it used to be an insane asylum back in the early 1900s. It was shut down after a patient went on a killing spree and murdered several people, including some of the staff. I tried to leave the house, but every time I tried to pack up and move, strange things would happen. My car would refuse to start, the doors would lock by themselves, and I would hear voices whispering in my ear, telling me to stay. Things continued to escalate, and it became clear that Abigail was possessed by one of the spirits that had been trapped in the house for over a century. I tried to perform an exorcism, but it only seemed to make things worse. In the end, I had no choice but to leave the house and move to another state. Abigail was institutionalized, and my son and I tried to move on with our lives. But even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that house and the horrors that lurked within its walls. I know that Abigail wasn't truly responsible for what happened. She was just a vessel for the evil that had been trapped in that house for so long. But I can never forget the terror that I felt when I saw her scooping the eyes out of her baby brother. It will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was home alone, relaxing in my living room, binge-watching my favorite horror movies. It was dark outside, and the only light source in the room was the flickering TV screen. Suddenly, I heard a knock on my door. I paused the movie and listened carefully, wondering who it could be at this late hour. I slowly got up and walked towards the door, looking through the peephole. To my surprise, there was no one outside. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably just a prank, and went back to the couch. But then, I heard the knock again, louder this time. I hesitated but decided to open the door, just in case it was an emergency. As soon as I opened the door, a gust of cold wind hit me, making me shiver. I looked outside, but there was no one. I was about to close the door when I heard a voice whispering my name. I turned around but saw no one there. Feeling uneasy, I closed the door and locked it. I sat back on the couch, trying to calm my nerves. But then, I heard the knock again. This time, it was coming from inside my closet. My heart started racing as I remembered the strange feeling I had earlier, telling me not to open the closet. I tried to ignore it and continued watching the movie, but the knocking persisted. It was getting louder and more frequent, making it impossible to concentrate on anything else. I finally gave in and decided to investigate. I got up and slowly approached the closet, feeling my hands trembling. I hesitated for a moment before finally opening the door. What I saw inside made me scream in terror. There was a dark figure staring back at me, with glowing eyes and sharp teeth. It was the size of a child but had the features of a monster. I couldn't move, frozen in fear as it slowly crawled out of the closet, making its way towards me. As it got closer, I noticed something strange about its eyes. They seemed familiar, like I had seen them before. Suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. It was my little sister, who had passed away years ago. The creature was a twisted version of her, as if she had returned from the dead. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The creature was now right in front of me, reaching out its hand. I closed my eyes, expecting the worst. But when I opened them again, it was gone. I looked around, trying to make sense of what just happened. Was it a hallucination? A nightmare? Or was it something more sinister? I never found out, but I never opened that closet again. The memory still haunts me to this day, reminding me that some doors are better left closed.